On this episode of AV Week, we take a look at large venue markets now that the Oakland Raiders are moving to Las Vegas. One final grand NFL stadium will be built, how to get in on the ground floor of that and where the market's headed. Also take a look at AV over IP and geeking out at InfoComm. All that and more next on AV Week.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
AV Week is brought to you by our fine group of underwriters, companies like Extron Electronics, and by Daylight, the leading producer of high-quality projection screens worldwide. This is AV Week, episode 292, recorded Friday, March 31st, 2017. Just a little more.
Ready.
AV Week.
Performing scan.
Week.
Online.
This is AV Week. This is AV Week, your weekly wrap-up of audio-visual news and information. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. With us to talk about that very thing, the news and information of the week. First and foremost, his name is Steve Greenblatt. He is the chief everything at Control Concepts, and he also hosts a show for us called State of Control. Hello, sir.
Hello, how are you?
I am doing well.
Good to be here.
Yeah. Also, I actually have a lot of control guys on this week. I'm not quite sure how that exactly happened. I need to fire my producer, but that's me. So next up is Dave Hatz. He is a control guru for AVI Systems and my favorite Blackhawks and Packers fan. How are you, sir?
Doing awesome. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with control guys.
No, I love my
Nothing
control guys. Writing a nice little control piece for SCN right now, and it's been an awful lot. Maybe that's what happened. I've been writing this piece subconsciously. Last but not least, his name is John Huntington, professor of entertainment technology at the it's not CUNY anymore, is it?
It's very confusing. We have three names, but yeah, we're part of CUNY, but it's New York City College of Technology, or CUNY.
Okay. CUNY, if you don't know, is the City University of New York, but you're part of that whole system. His name is John Huntington. How are you, sir?
Good. In rainy New York.
Rainy New York. I need to resurrect this, John, real quick. We were talking off the air about John's haunted house, and the reason I say control system is John has a haunted house that he and his students do, and some of the coolest show control I've ever seen. So we either need to resurrect that podcast we did, good Lord, 5 years ago now, or do another one. So, all right, let's chat about the AV news and information. First and foremost, from our friends over at Commercial Integrator, there's a webinar that they're doing in conjunction with ZV, and not for nothing, but ZV's got some pretty interesting things as far as sending HD over IP or AV over IP in general. What I wanted to ask you guys, and if you're listening to this podcast next week or watching it, the webinar is April 19th. Like I said, Commercial Integrator is doing it in conjunction with ZV. Dave, I want to start with you on this because over the last 6 months, and probably even over the last year, we've had a number of, I'm going to call them standards, and I'm going to use that word in quotations, but standards based on sending audio and video over network. Not twisted pair, and please understand the differentiation here. I know you do, Dave, but just for those listening, I can send certain protocols and certain signals over twisted pair. That does not necessarily mean it's over IP. Does not necessarily mean it's over network. I remember 10, 15 years ago, two competing products were basically taking the analog audio and video and converting it somehow and transmitting it over the twisted pair, basically using the copper as a transport. They weren't necessarily turning it into ones and zeros. So let's back away from that a little bit and talk about actual network transport here. Dave, give me a sense, a real quick 30-second where we're at as far as transmitting over the network, and where do you think we're going to go over the next year or so?
Well, I think we're past that sort of bleeding edge of adoption.
Okay.
You start to see, if you look at just all the manufacturers out there who are have been on, we'll call it the HD-based T bandwagon, who have been doing, have started out and realized that, oh, we need products to transmit video and audio to compete with everyone else. They're right now starting to release, IP-based products. And obviously there's a number of big players who've been doing it for quite a while and have really, fortified their products, fortified their, the standards that they've adopted. And, so I think we're coming into a spot where at InfoComm, especially this year, streaming IP is going to be all over the place, and it's a good thing. I mean, I think it's one that I've tried to get everyone at AVI and all of our customers to approach it as it's just another transport. The same way that you might use, baseband video, you might use HD-based T, you also might use IP, and it's important to everyone in the industry to understand and to educate themselves where each one applies, what are the benefits, where are the drawbacks, and then you can make an informed decision. I don't think we're going to get to a point, at least anytime soon, where IP is going to be the only solution.
Okay.
I think there's still a place for HD-based T. There's still a place for baseband video. But I think there's a lot of attractive aspects to IP, the biggest being that it's expandable. You're not locked into the physical I/O connections of a traditional routing system. And that's, the article that we were talking about in Commercial Integrator really goes to that, with IP gone are, at least in some respects, the days of forklift upgrades, where we have to take that 8x8 input switcher and replace it with a 16x16 chassis because I need that 9th input. Now,
no, that's a valid point, dude.
Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you, how many times we've done that, where a customer has 8 inputs, 8 outputs, and our choices are to pre-switch on one of the inputs and give up some flexibility, or to turn around and put a new chassis in that's oversized for what they need, but they just need a little bit more. And that's one of the things IP has the potential to alleviate. Now, I will throw out on the flip side, when you're deploying IP solutions, you need to be very conscious of the network you're putting it on. And you need to design the network the same way that traditionally you would have designed your inputs and outputs of that core chassis. It's important to consider. And when you get it right, it's great. And when you don't, there's problems just like any other system that we install. It's just this time it's less likely to be the cables and more likely to be the configuration.
Yeah, or the power of the network itself, because you're right.
Absolutely.
It's just like with a switcher, and they were back in the day. There were various types of switchers and bandwidth and speed and stuff like that. Same thing with the network. If you design and install a network and you give it less than the needed power or bandwidth, you're going to have some issues.
Well, and the other thing I'll throw out is, when you're looking at IP, it very much is a 3-sided triangle, where you get really high quality, near lossless quality. You get bandwidth on another point, the amount of traffic it takes to get that signal from point A to point B, and you get latency on the third point, how quickly the signal moves from point A to point B. And as with most triangles, you can't have all 3. You can have 2 of them.
What is it? Fast, easy, and cheap?
Exactly. Exactly.
Or no, fast, good, and cheap.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Fast, good, and cheap. All right, Steve, let's bring this in over to the pure control side and talking about controlling these systems. Not for nothing, but control systems themselves over the last 10 or 15, over the last 10 years really, have started migrating as well to the network. So Mr. Hatz makes a very good point. You've got to figure in not just the bandwidth for your audio and video, but also for the other parts and pieces of the AV system. So how are you managing that, not just with your clients, but your clients' clients?
We've been on the network for a while, I think, and I think it's something that's a conversation that you have to have with every system. So it is something new to think about in terms of how do you pass the video and audio, and how do you segment the network. But I think we've been getting comfortable in those conversations, and I think long past are the days where we are intimidated by having a IT person in a room. I think that the comfort level is now there where we can have intelligent conversations. We have documentation to point to. We have the right people to be able to come together and say this is reality. This is something that's accepted, and we could talk about how to plan and what kind of talking about where Dave was going with things too. There's always this need to be able to be expandable and that future proof. And I think that video and audio over the network is that solution.
All right. John, I want to take a little bit sidestep here with you specifically because of what you do and working in not just show control as well, but also we mentioned the haunted house. That is a student-led project where you guys are showing them how to run shows. One of the most interesting things, and I actually still have John's book behind me, his show control book, in there, and you wrote that, good Lord, 4 or 5 years ago now, you were already doing things on the network, right? On your blog, there was some pretty impressive pictures of all the switches and everything like that. So walk me through sending audio and video and control, obviously, in a what I'll call a high pressure system or high pressure environment like a show, and what you guys do to safeguard troubles that happens, whether it's redundancy or what have you, how you guys mitigate some of those issues that pop up.
Oh, sure. So we actually, we've been doing the haunted house now. I honestly can't remember anymore, but like 15 years. So it was all serial and MIDI and contact closures and stuff. And now for 4 or 5 years now, it's been 100% IP control and also distribution. And we've been running Dante for 5 years now, something like that. And then all the control is up there. We also stream a bunch of surveillance video over it, just with off the shelf, PoE cameras and stuff. And I've actually written on my blog, many thousands of words about the audio networking and the live performance side, which of course overlaps with the permanent install, but we're in a little bit different area. And the Dante solution for us has really become, I wouldn't say a de facto standard, but it's very, very widely used in the live sound market now. And it's interesting. We're still seeing, for example, like having students around is one of the best ways to see how people can find new ways to plug things in strange ways. And so we're still seeing some things, just them wrapping their minds around the idea, like, oh, you have the switch. And what's kind of weird with that also on the haunted house is that, and this is something for people who are just trying to learn this stuff, that the physical topology of your system now is really divorced from the signal flow. So the old days, we'd have this thing would go from here to here to here with a bunch of cable. And then you can kind of follow it, could put your hand on it, figure it out. But nowadays it's like, oh, everything's plugging into a switch and then it's all virtual, the pathways between. And that to me, once you get your mind around that, it's really great. And there's so many benefits of it. And I think this kind of idea of moving some video on IP is pretty exciting to me, because I just actually said we're building a new building and we were really struggling with what kind of cable infrastructure do we want in there, because we do a lot of HDBaseT stuff currently. And actually just using it on a show, it's running again tonight. We're using it just to send some video a few hundred feet back and forth. Yeah. But I literally just printed out the chart the other day that, it works great, but with 5E, it's this length, with 6A, it's this length, with 7, it's this length. And it gets kind of crazy. So I'd love to see, it's just the Ethernet switch. And we can sort of manage that. I would say I just Googled ZV, and right on their homepage it says send 0 latency video over IP with Zypher. So I'd be kind of interested in how they're doing anything with 0 latency. Unless don't get me started about 0 latency. That's right. You can say very short latency, but I don't know how you can do 0. But it's right on the homepage. Yeah, exactly. Nanoseconds, sure. Really, yes, exactly. Nanoseconds, and maybe it's visually, right. 0. I'd say within a frame. That's fine. Within a frame, and right. Good Lord, all of us are old enough to remember, 29 drop frame. So, right. Real quickly, John, how do you? I guess I should ask it this way: how do you get folks to wrap their head around it? Because understand, all 4 of us are of a certain age. That's right. Yeah.
I'm not going to say what that age is. I'm just saying we're all of a certain age.
Sure.
We grew up with that physical device. And at my first job in radio, I had an actual patch bay, right? I freaking, a version of a quarter-inch plug, but it's a quarter-inch plug, from one port to another port to get it back up on the board. That was our routing system. So you're right, it was a physical piece that I could look at and I could interface with. And there's not anymore. So when you're teaching the next generation and the generation after that coming up, do you think it's easier for them because they don't have that physical piece so they can visualize it? Or is it hard because they don't have a physical piece to wrap their head on?
Yeah, it's actually really fascinating. I think it's harder. And because what happened with us is our programs only existed about 15, 20 years, in the form that it is now. So we actually didn't have a whole lot of sort of historical equipment there and, the older stuff that was there. But we had, we had a couple digital consoles and a bunch of analog stuff. And then as things got older, we kind of let the analog stuff just sort of age out and not replace it because you're like, well, I don't need all these reverbs and compressors because I got this console. It's all built in. And then last year, a couple years ago, I went back and we actually went back and purchased a whole lot more analog stuff to replace all our old things because now I realized that they were just really struggling with it to us. And maybe it's because of the way the digital consoles in the audio area anyway are modeled. They're modeled, based on the old analog stuff that all of us came up with. But yeah, we now start with analog and then have them do that and get, until they get all the, what an aux send is and all that kind of stuff. Yep. And then once they're done with that, then we go, okay, now I literally do a lecture this year where I drew the analog thing on the whiteboard and I drew a box around. Okay, all that's in the console now. Same thing. It's there. It's just that it's a number now. And I think in video, it's a little bit easier on the more broadcast staging side because it's still, like it's an SDI cable or something like that. So that point-to-point kind of idea still exists to some extent. So you get into really crazy systems. But even then, we're still kind of, we're rationing it down to some smaller, gateways between things. So it's a little easier to understand. But that, I think, as that goes, fully onto the network, that could change.
If I could be so bold as to add something to your lecture, if you can pull up the Yamaha ad from a number of years ago, where, and I still remember this because it was a great ad. It visualizes exactly what you're talking about. It was, and I don't remember, the console was like $30,000. It was, you can buy this console for $30,000, or you can buy this console, and it was a 16-channel console and 16 channels of compression and 16 channels of EQ, and it was like $150,000, $200,000 for everything.
Right.
So it really did visualize that.
And that's what I say to the students, that we're not going back, right? Because you can't, even the console, we're a big Yamaha shop, and the console we bought that replaced the other digital console now, CL5, is like a third less, does more, all this kind of stuff. And I also think it's going to stick around for a while. All these things now, I think we're kind of there, at least on the audio side. So it's, our last console, and I didn't tell the administration this, but there's really nothing wrong with it other than it doesn't have a touch screen or USB port, but it still works fine. And the new one doesn't really even do much more, really, other than it has a different operating paradigm. So it's important from a training aspect.
No, and the ability to save those scenes though is important.
Oh yeah, we still, the other console can do it, but it's on compact flash. So
okay.
The thing I'll add to that real quick. The thing I'll add to that though is think about taking that paradigm of how the audio industry has adapted from analog to video analog to digital over a number of years, and think forward now on the video side. If we, once we get into IT, everything becomes software based.
Right.
So now things like, the way you took those compressors and instead of being standalone boxes, now they're just baked in. Think things like, keying, things like, character generation, graphics now become integrated in a whole lot more products potentially. Things, moving forward in the video realm that we do manually once in a while have the opportunity to come in and become more commonplace. And that's where I'm curious to see where some of the manufacturers start to really push that paradigm on the video side, is putting in a little bit more features for the same or less cost than we had before, and really seeing where that can fly.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Folks are still debating whether or not AV and IT are the same thing or separate, or can next to each other or whatever. That is the benefit actually of accepting the IT-ness and the computer part as we kind of can move forward. Is holy cow, we can do things, and we bitch and moan about firmware updates, but just with the flick of a switch with firmware, a lot of the products that we put in have a whole new set of features, just with a simple but a firmware update. So yeah, that it's really, really cool kind of where we're going. So.
And I would say there's no question that AV is IT now. It's just a question of who does it.
Yeah.
Which department does. I mean, we're kind of lucky in my school that the IT department's kind of overwhelmed and they leave us alone and we run our own cable and do all kinds of other stuff. But I think we're building, managed networks and doing all the same stuff. It's just we have a few different concerns and just a question of who's doing it.
Yeah. All right, guys. Real quickly, we're gonna talk a little bit. It's an odd story for us, at least. This comes to us from ESPN, and I'm not kidding. ESPN this week, the Oakland Raiders were announced that they are moving to Las Vegas, and the headline here is, with $6.7 billion in public money, the NFL closes a stadium era. This is written by Kevin Sievert. He talks a little bit about the public money that's going into building the stadium in Las Vegas. Not for nothing, and let's go around the horn here. I'll do it for you guys. Steve and John are both in the New York, New Jersey area. Small little stadium that was opened there called the Meadowlands a couple of years ago. $1 billion and some change. Actually, a young man from the St. Louis area helped, was the operations manager for that. So Mr. Hatz is in Chicago. Not that they have a new stadium in Chicago, but they had an awfully big upgrade in Chicago a few years ago. I'm in St. Louis, which is Oakland Central. So we lost a football team to another city called Los Angeles. And even through all that, they incorporated and hired an architectural firm. I know of 3 AV companies in St. Louis alone that were bidding on that new stadium that the St. Louis community was trying to put together. The reason I want to bring this up is 2 things. And Steve, we're going to start with you on this. There's obviously going to be a stadium that's being built in Las Vegas. So question number 1 is, how do you get in to that system? How do you get into that job? And how do you determine whether or not you want to get in on that job?
Good question. It obviously depends on what type of work that you go after and the type of work that you do, because and we've discussed this before, that's work that you do in stadiums is different than works that you do in conference rooms or classrooms or homes or whatever it might be. You definitely have to start as far up the food chain as you can get. So with an architect or a designer or consultants, and if that's something that you really are after and and it's in your core competency, making some type of a pitch based on other work that you've done and trying to really make an impression, obviously is going to give you an advantage. I think that's something that it also can be regional, because you want to be able to service that type of a system, because it isn't something that you just do and walk away from it. And I know from speaking to others who have been involved in stadium work that even throughout the first season or the first year of being in a new stadium, there are many, many things that go on that challenge the system and that you need to be on call to support. And then there's also different types of components within a stadium. I mean, I know you could have everything from controlling the overall stadium sound and video to being in a suite, to some of them also have conference rooms and boardrooms that you have to consider. So there's many different aspects.
Trophy rooms, depending on the
that's true too.
success of that franchise.
That is true too. We definitely know somebody who had to think about adding another trophy to a touch
It wasn't
panel.
Hats and the Bears, so let's just put that, or even Green Bay in the last 10 years. So, all right, John, I want to bring you in on this, because John, not for nothing, is he teaches students. how do you train, or what do you train your students to get jobs like this and to maintain? I mean, Steve mentioned the first year or two, and I would actually argue the first year or two, yeah, as you kind of move into a system, and then the 5 or 10 year mark, once that system has some is long in the tooth, you're going to run into different issues. So how do you train your students to get, hit the ground running and be able to maintain these systems and run them?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think part of our core philosophy is focusing on the fundamentals, because as we all know, we make people experts in some whatever type of system today, that system will be obsolete in 5 years or out of business or whatever. But if you understand, what a video signal is, what an IP address is, what a frequency is, all those type of things, then it's just a question of how do you get to those things on whatever system it is. And also for troubleshooting, and it's kind of interesting, like people ask, well, how do you troubleshoot something? And I really had to think about that. And I actually have a chapter in my book, just like a process, because we just do it. We don't even think about it. But the key part of that is just understanding the fundamental, what's going on in there. And we see, again, being around students a lot, you see a lot of things like, we'll see, a BNC connector can be many different things. And they're just like, oh, I had a BNC connector, I plugged it in. And they're like, well, you just took an analog thing and plugged it into a digital thing. And they don't really get that. So I think that's our philosophy, focus on that. And then in terms of getting them into these companies and getting the jobs, we have a required internship. Of course, being in New York, we're lucky with that. And our students end up more in the live events and staging market than installation, but we have had a few students that do it for a while, and then they don't want to have the crazy hours and whatever and end up in the install side. And I think it comes from, I think if you can survive in the live event world, then the transition to the install side is a little easier than the other way around, because you're kind of coming from the crazier area, into the, not that installs can't be crazy, but it's a little more, not quite
controlled chaos.
Right, exactly.
All right, Mr. Hatz, here's the hard question. This is the crystal ball question. If this gentleman is right, and we have ended the era of the big stadium upgrades, and is talking to a few people, every stadium is different, but the average is about 20, 30 years, and this started about 20 years ago. Where's the next stadium market? You've got folks that made their bread and butter for the last 20 years on building stadiums. Where's the next market that is that?
Well, I think, as we look at it from the technology side, I have to disagree with the headline that
Okay.
I don't see it being over by a long shot. And in part, that's because game experience is what really trumps all as far as the stadium managers are concerned. It's about the game experience. And every team is looking to up the competition, to be the best in their sport league. And so I see, mobile entertainment is becoming really hot. There's a lot of being focused on trying to get more in the hands of each, patron at a sporting event, whether it's statistics, video replays, just being able to, wayfinding and, almost digital signage type applications.
Yep.
There's a lot being put in towards improving game day entertainment. And so I see a lot of technology, a lot of opportunity for technology to continue to advance in these sporting event arenas. And the other thing, I sort of mentioned it, but every team is looking around to see what the others are doing. It's a really, really tight community, not even just baseball with baseball, football with football, but everybody in that small community knows what the others are doing. And by goodness, if somebody catches on to a good idea, the next season you can bet there's going to be half a dozen or a dozen teams doing the same thing. And in 2 or 3 years, every team is going to have it.
Yeah.
And so, to say that, yes, I think the idea of building the brand new facility might be on hold for a while, that there's not too many teams left who need that. But I think you're going to continue to see, the refreshes, and those are going to include rebuilding the suites, rebuilding the concourses, freshening up the restaurants. It's going to include all of those aspects, which have, you might have an 8-year-old stadium, but I'll bet you they're planning on how do they refresh the concessions next season, or how do they upgrade the suites to make them more attractive and be able to raise the price on them. How can they, they want to increase ticket prices. You can be sure of that. And so, they are conscious of what technology, what is that game day experience, and they're going to continue to invest in that.
I'll add one more piece to your game day experience, and that comes to us by way of our editor-in-chief, Josh Schrago. When the Pokemon Go craze came out, his initial reaction was, think about going to a game and having all of your fantasy football stats, and you hold up your phone and you have an app that watches, that player, and their fantasy football stats are automatically updated while you're watching through your phone. So, AR is certainly in there as well. So, all right, gentlemen, that's going to do us. Real quickly, InfoComm is coming up. John has a couple things, or actually has one thing. It's a cool thing that I know a couple of folks have gone to. I still have not made it to, and I apologize for that. But it's a geek tour, and I'll bring up the page here, John, on your website. We'll put a link to it on our page here. But explain to folks exactly what you're kind of looking for.
Sure. Yeah, we do this thing. My buddy Jim Janik, who has a company in Orlando called Timber Spring, he does a lot of control stuff for all he can ever say is a major theme park in Orlando, but you can guess who he works for mostly. So for, I don't know, 6-7 years now, we have done during InfoComm. It's not part of InfoComm, but a lot of obviously AV people there, but a lot of control and show control people there, people doing control for live shows and theme parks and stuff like that. So what we started doing is we find some space somewhere wherever the town is, and then we just get together and do basically case studies to each other on whatever projects were interesting that year. So we select 3 or 4 different projects, and it's totally open. We have some exciting news I can't announce yet about people sponsoring it, and it's going to be pretty interesting. But what's open right now is we're looking for proposals. That's due on, I'm trying to find, April 24th. And if you go to my website, which can I can't even say my own website, controlgeek.net.
I have the same problem, John.
Yeah. Have a Google form there. If you fill that out, we're always looking for projects. We usually, doesn't have to be a theme park. It's my definition of show control is just any 2 or more entertainment control systems tied together in some way. So lighting and sound and video, sound and pyro and machinery, typically for live shows. And what's kind of fascinating is this is all, people from direct competitors in the show control market basically presenting to each other about what they did, which makes it really fun. And then this year we usually have some kind of thing, typically like mini golf or bowling or something afterwards, and drinking, of course, that's always involved. So that'll be all part of it. And we have some news about that I can't quite announce yet, but that's coming very soon. But the event itself will be June 15th, Thursday, I think 6 o'clock usually. There's at InfoComm, of course, there's always conflicts. We always conflict with the Crestron party or something, but that date seems to work pretty well. But the deadline, if you're interested in submitting something, is April 24th, and you can see all. And I also have on my website, I have a link to previous ones, so you can see what we've done in the past. But it's totally free. No one gets paid, obviously, for anything, but also it's free for anybody to attend. We did one. The last time we were in Orlando, actually, we did it in the public library. And one of the things, I gave away a copy of my book to some kid who just randomly showed up at the library, came to the presentation and thought it was really cool. So I drew names out of a hat, and that was really great because he's like, wow, this is really cool. I didn't even know this was a thing. So that's the fun part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So take a look at that. Like I said, we'll put a link to that and all the other stories that we've talked about on the show page. Gentlemen, Steve, how do people find you, get a hold of you for Control Concepts?
Company website is controlconcepts.net, and personally, I'm on social media at Steve Greenblatt, and be sure to check out A State of Control on AVNation.tv.
Yes. Mr. Hatz is on there every once in a while. Mr. Hatz, how do people find you and or AVI Systems?
AVIsystems.com. Personally, I'm on the Twitter at Dave Hatz AVI.
And if you're in the Chicago area, come the first week of May,
yes,
you will see a longtime Packers fan in one Mr. Hatz hanging out with a longtime Bears fan. That would be me, talking about IoT security in Soldier Field.
Absolutely. AVI Live the first week of May. AVIsystems.com to get more information and sign up. But there will be tours of Soldier Field, all kinds of AV information, IT security, healthcare. We've got you covered on all the bases. So.
Collaboration, all sorts of stuff. So
absolutely.
All right, Mr. Huntington. One more time, how do people get a hold of you?
I have a bunch of different social media things, but they're all linked back from controlgeek.net is my website.
Perfect. All right. My name is Tim Albright. Don't follow me on the Twitters, although at this point I'm celebrating the 15 people the Bears have at quarterback right now. Go by the website if you would, please. By the time you're listening to this, we have a new site. Now, we're recording this on Friday, so these guys can't see the new site, but you can see the new site because it's going to be live by the time you hear this. I'm saying that and hoping nothing goes sideways this weekend. But
publicly now.
Yes,
Thank goodness
exactly.
for post-production if you need
my
it.
gosh, yeah. I'll cut this whole thing off if it doesn't go up. But no, AVNation.tv. AVNation.tv, brand spanking new site. Lots of cool stuff in the back end. New look. Let us know what you think. As I mentioned, we'll put all of the story links to John's website as well on the show page. So check that out if you would, please. Also, if you could, we have a different model for advertisers. We call them underwriters. They help us and they support what we do. So we ask that you support them. Check that out as well. All of that is at avnation.tv. avnation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. This has been AV Week.